Chapter 33. Unwelcome Guests. Reyes's plate was soon nearly empty. Gaggara was still chewing on one of the chicken legs, in the hope of getting what little meat still remained. "Can I get the two of you something else to drink?" the innkeeper asked. He seemed to be doting on them, to the exclusion of his other two patrons. "Do you have any more meat?" Reyes asked hopefully. "Nothing else ready," the innkeeper replied. "I suppose I could slaughter a chicken for you, but it would take a couple of hours to prepare." "Don't bother then," Reyes said. "My wife and I are looking to make an early start in the morning. Prepare us the chicken for breakfast." "Chicken for breakfast?" the innkeeper sounded a little surprised. "Yes, sir, and would you like some eggs in the morning?" "You have eggs?" Reyes said, wondering why they hadn't been offered eggs for dinner. "We've already run out for today, but there should be a few by morning," the innkeeper commented. "As soon as it's light, I'll send my son out to collect them." "In that case, we may as well turn in for the night. Where might we find our room?" Reyes asked. "Certainly, sir. Give me a moment." The innkeeper stepped over to the bar and grabbed one of the oil lamps. Then he headed towards the main door that led out of the bar room. "Follow me, please." "We go outside?" Reyes asked incredulously. "It's the way the place was built, sir," the innkeeper replied. He approached the door, opening it slowly as if he expected something to be waiting just outside. Then he peered through the opening at the world outside. There was a sudden cold rush of air in the barroom, but nothing else of any real note. The Ploughman's Arms was an old converted barn. The old hayloft had been extended, and the floor strengthened for the inn's guest rooms. Due to the way the barn had been converted, there were no steps leading up to the old hayloft actually inside the inn. Those staying here had to venture out into the cold night air and get to the rooms via a set of wooden steps that had been built onto the side of the inn. The innkeeper led the way, his oil lamp lighting the path for the young couple. Shadows cast from the oil lamp flashed momentarily on the wall of the inn as the lamp swung gently in the hand of the innkeeper. The steps were long and narrow. They creaked when even the slightest weight was placed on them, and Reyes couldn't help but wonder if they could take the weight load that had been expected of them. The innkeeper had to weigh twice what either of the harpies weighed, and yet he didn't seem to notice how some of the steps bent a little out of shape as he ascended. About halfway up the steps was a short landing. Gaggara stopped there for a moment and rested lightly against the support rail, looking out at the countryside. Reyes would have to agree that it was a beautiful view, but then harpies tended to like being high up. From where he stood on the steps, he could see the thick forest they had flown over earlier that evening, and the chicken coop where they had first seen the innkeeper. Slightly to the left, bordered by trees, was the King's Highway, whereas to the right, Reyes was actually able to catch sight of a couple of the other buildings of the village, even though they were in complete darkness. Reyes didn't stay there long. He hurried up the steps after the innkeeper, before the other got too far ahead. "Come on, my angel," he called to Gaggara, deliberately avoiding the use of her name. He was sure it would be better for everyone if the innkeeper didn't hear that Gaggara had a harpy name. Gaggara looked up at her boyfriend and let out a sigh before she continued to climb the steps. "It's a long way up." "Hush," Reyes insisted. He looked worriedly up at the innkeeper, but if he had heard, he hadn't noticed that Gaggara hadn't spoken flourish. "Why couldn't he have just directed us to these steps and let us fly up?" Gaggara whispered. "Come on," Reyes insisted. The inn was quite small. In the barroom there had only been room for 5 tables and 4 chairs to each table. Here in the hayloft, despite the fact that the loft had been extended the entire length of the inn, there were only 4 rooms. 2 rooms sat on either side of a long thin corridor that ran for the entire length of the building. The innkeeper produced the key from the pouch of his apron and walked over to the first door on the left. Once there, the innkeeper used the lantern to light the keyhole enough for him to see to unlock it. "This will be your room, sir." "My room," Reyes said, a little uncertain. "I'm afraid these are only single rooms, sir," the innkeeper explained. "There wasn't enough room to build anything else. I'll put you in this one and your wife across the hall." Reyes looked at the room across the hall. The idea that he and she should be separated in the middle of human territory scared him. He was quite sure that Gaggara wasn't about to get up to any mischief, but what if she should feel panic at being alone in a land surrounded by humans? "I can't allow myself and my wife to be separated," Reyes declared. "I think we'll share the room." "If you're sure, sir," the innkeeper said. "I'm sure," Reyes replied. "We'll manage somehow." The innkeeper shrugged his shoulders. He opened the door to the room and led the way inside, illuminating the way with the oil lamp. Reyes glanced quickly back at the hayloft entrance, wondering where Gaggara had gotten to, and then he followed the innkeeper into the room. It was a small room, Due to the curvature of the roof, there weren't many places to stand. Fortunately, where the ceiling curved the worst, the innkeeper had had the foresight to place the bed there. He had been right, this was only a single room. It wasn't a very large bed, but Reyes and Gaggara had shared smaller beds together. Other than the bed, there was only one piece of furniture in the room. A small table that rested at the head of the bed, placed against the wall as far as it was possible to get from the door. The table had 4 legs, but it balanced precariously on just 3 of them. Resting in the centre of the table was a small candle, which was currently unlit. The innkeeper rested his lantern gently on the edge of the table and opened the protective cover to reveal the flame. Then, with the aid of a taper that he had carried in the pouch of his apron, he lit the candle. "There you go, sir, ma'am." The innkeeper looked around, and then after a couple of seconds said, "Where is your wife?" "Still outside, I think," Reyes commented. Then he called out to her, "Angel!" "Handsome," she called back in a worried tone, and at a volume that the innkeeper must have been able to hear. "I'm scared. I can't see a thing." "It's okay, my angel," Reyes called to her. "I'll come and fetch you." "Strange," the innkeeper commented. Evidently he didn't notice that Gaggara hadn't spoken flourish, or was he purposely ignoring it? "I didn't think it was that dark tonight. Come, I have the lantern." Reyes and the innkeeper returned to the top of the steps. Gaggara was about halfway between the middle landing and the top. She was on her hands and knees, trying to feel her way slowly up. "Follow the light, sweetie," Reyes told her. Now that Reyes was there, lighting the way for her, it was a fairly easy matter for her to get back to her feet and climb the rest of the steps to the top. As she reached the top, she looked at the innkeeper and then at her boyfriend. Then she held him tightly. The innkeeper coughed politely. "I'd better be getting back to my other guests. You two have a good night now, and I'll have Sam Pear come and wake you in the morning." "Thank you," Reyes replied. "I expect we'll be up before then, though. Besides, I'm not sure I want your son bursting in on us while we're sleeping." "Sam Pear knows better than that," the innkeeper commented. "He'll knock on the door, and will only enter the room if invited." "Thank you," Reyes replied. He knew that Gaggara wouldn't mind being seen in a state of undress, but as a young gentleman, he felt it was the sort of thing that should bother him. The innkeeper smiled and began to make his way back down the steps to the bar. Then he stopped and climbed back to the top. He handed Reyes the key to the room. "You'd better have this." "Thank you," Reyes said as he took the key. The innkeeper turned round and headed back down the steps. Reyes watched him go for a moment. Then he turned his attention fully on his girlfriend. He took her hand in his and kissed her gently on the side of the head. "Let's go to bed." "To sleep?" Gaggara commented suspiciously. "Of course," Reyes replied. Sometimes Reyes wondered if being pregnant had truly destroyed Gaggara's libido. He didn't think it was worth the risk of upsetting his love to find out. Reyes expected Gaggara to be horrified at what she saw when she entered the room. Instead, her reaction was almost the opposite. "Oh, what a sweet little room. This reminds me of my hut back in Harpy Town." "Cramped," Reyes suggested. He had seen the innkeeper descend the steps, and yet part of him feared that the man might be standing right outside the door listening in. "Cosy," Gaggara commented. Reyes grinned. He pounced on the door and pushed it closed. There was no one standing there listening. Then he locked it and placed the key on the table next to the candle. "Can you help me remove these clothes?" Gaggara asked. "Alicia helped me to put them on the first time, but I have no real idea how clothing works." Reyes couldn't help smiling. A human might well take such a request in totally the wrong way, but to a harpy, clothing was nothing more than an unnatural irritation. Reyes placed his ring hand gently on Gaggara's shoulder and wheeled her clothing into one of the dimensional pockets of the hammerstone. "Thank you, handsome," Gaggara said. She plucked Agnar's ring from her finger. The look on her face became one of extreme relief as her body reverted to its natural configuration. Gaggara immediately unfurled her wings as far as they would go in the space provided, and then folded them again, as if she was trying to ensure that they were still there, and they still worked. "Gaggara?" Reyes asked worriedly. "I can't sleep in that body," Gaggara explained. "I find the form so uncomfortable. To me, this room isn't cramped, but that body is. Please don't ask me." "It's okay, love," Reyes assured her. "The innkeeper assures us we won't be disturbed." "Good," Gaggara responded. She made herself comfortable on the bed, moving as far over as she could to make room for him to join her. Reyes wheeled his own clothing away and sat down on the edge of the bed. He was about to lie down beside his girlfriend when she reached out her hand and said, "Please, not like that." "Sweetheart," Reyes commented. "I'm sorry," Gaggara confided. "I love you, but that body is so ugly." Reyes couldn't see the harm, except perhaps that the bed was too narrow and his wings and tail would be hanging off the edge of the bed. But then, it wouldn't be the first time he'd slept like that. He willed himself into what he now thought of as his normal form, and then lay down on the bed beside the girl he loved. And there was so little room on the bed that they had to hold on to each other so that they could lie side by side. The bed was uncomfortable, lumpy, rough and cold, but he had Gaggara with him, and to Reyes that was all that mattered. He turned his head enough to blow out the candle, and then settled back down. After a long day of flying, and the lack of any real sleep he had had the previous night, he was asleep within a very few minutes. It was a strange dream. He was in the Great Temple in First Town, a place he had never actually been in his entire life. Jenny was there, as were Greyforth and both his parents. Tia was also there, even though Reyes knew that he was dead. They were attending a wedding. The dukes and duchesses of every dukedom of Florith were there, not just the noble families, but all the most important people from each of their lands. Reyes looked at them, faces he had never once seen in his life, yet he knew them all as if they were old friends. There was Orson the Minotaur, and Agnot, his old teacher. There was Nida, the girl who had given her life to save his, and Wallag, the one who had betrayed his trust. Where was Gaggara? He looked around worriedly for his fiancée, only to stop when she placed a reassuring arm over his shoulder. She had been standing next to him this whole time. The two of them were standing at the front of the congregation. They weren't just attending the wedding, they were the happy couple. Reyes looked deeply into Gaggara's eyes. "Are you ready, my angel?" Reyes asked. Gaggara looked around uncertainly. Then she glanced back at him, and in crisp, clear flourish she replied, "I am ready, my husband-to-be." "I protest!" It was Greyforth. He had climbed up out of his seat and was addressing the rest of the congregation. "Two harpies can't get married like this. It will taint the sanctity of the entire ceremony." "They have gold," was the reply from someone else in the congregation. The reply didn't seem to make a lot of sense to Reyes. What did gold have to do with anything? "Yes, I know," Greyforth replied sharply. "I still don't think this is a good idea." There was a sudden rattle that didn't seem to belong. Reyes began to look about himself frantically. Then he gazed out at the congregation, trying to find the source of the noise. Someone, it looked like it might have been Tia, was holding up a ball and chain and rattling in it. Oh, very symbolic, Reyes thought to himself. He turned his attention back to Gaggara. Only Gaggara wasn't standing there any longer. She had been replaced by Anida. Reyes' mind seemed to accept this as normal, except he couldn't begin to guess why he would be getting married to Anida. "I can't marry her," Reyes complained loudly. "I'm not here to marry you," Anida replied. "I'm here to stop you marrying that." She prodded him sharply in the stomach. "You're human, Reyes. You only think you're a harpy." Then her voice suddenly became very deep, almost masculine. "Got it?" "No," Reyes replied. "I was brought up as a human, but I am a harpy. I should marry a harpy. But harpies don't get married." It was Gaggara who was talking this time. Somehow she had stepped to the other side of him. They were no longer standing in the chapel waiting to be married. Now they were in the great hall back at the castle of the month. The room was being prepared for a great wedding feast. There was a loud squeak, as of a door opening somewhere. Over in the corner of the great hall, a tiny mouse was running across the room towards Reyes. "I don't think this is a good idea," the mouse said in a voice that was far too deep for it. "Who cares what a mouse thinks?" Reyes replied, assuming that it was being as critical about his relationship as Anida had been. "I love Gaggara. I'm glad I married her." "I can't see a thing," the mouse insisted. "What?" Reyes asked, puzzled. "Shh," Gaggara uttered, her own voice sounding more masculine than it should. "Just keep a watch by the door like I told you. Let me know if you see anyone coming." He felt at a loss. The great hall seemed to vanish around him. Now he was in his old bedroom at the castle. Gaggara was standing before him in her natural harpy form, but wearing a wedding dress evidently designed for a human. It clearly didn't fit her properly, and yet, as Reyes tried to divine what was wrong with the dress, he couldn't see a problem. There was an armed guard in the room. He was standing by the door and was armed with a halberd in his hand. Reyes wasn't sure he wanted to be watched while he enjoyed his wedding night with his wife. "Leave us," Reyes insisted of the guard. "Careful now," the guard replied cryptically. "Don't wake them." "Ah!" Gaggara yelped, her voice too deep and too masculine for comfort. "What is it?" the guard hissed. I'm not sure, Gaggara replied. She reached behind Reyes and started to stroke his wings in a loving manner. Something weird. Livery. I can't see to be sure. Forget it, the guard hissed as silently as he could. Search his clothes and find that gold. Gaggara looked at Reyes and tilted her head to one side. There are no clothes here. And indeed, she was standing before him naked again. All I can find is a key and the candle. Gaggara produced a small key in one hand and a candle in the other. Reyes blinked confused. What do you plan to do with those? Clothes might be under the bed, the guard commented. Harpies don't wear clothes, Reyes replied confused. Or they may have gone to bed in them, the guard suggested, especially considering how tired they were. Who? Reyes asked. Nothing seemed to be making sense to him at the moment. Maybe, Gaggara commented. I need some light. I can't see a thing in here. Perhaps I'd better light the candle. Prepare your dagger. This might wake them up. There was a moment's glare as a bright light hit Reyes right in the face. Then he heard a man's voice scream. Reyes sat bolt upright. It took him a moment to get his bearings. He was back in the room he and Gaggara had taken at the inn. The candle had been lit. He was lying on the edge of the bed he was sharing with his girlfriend, his wings and tail draped lazily on the floor, and one leg also half hanging over the side. What's going on? Gaggara said worriedly. I'm not sure, Reyes commented. There was noise. The telltale creaking of someone heading down the steps as quickly as they could go. The distinctive clump 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 of footsteps was quite audible in the night air. Someone was screaming in a voice that sounded like that of a young girl. Harpies! Harpies at the inn! The innkeeper was right! The innkeeper was right! Reyes yawned loudly. He sighed. He was feeling so tired that he didn't want to move, but he swung himself out of bed just the same and climbed to his feet. I think we've just had a visit from a couple of would-be thieves. Harpies! The scream continued. Sounds like they got quite a shock when they saw what we were, Reyes added. Really? Gaggara sat up and climbed eagerly out of bed. Let's get them. Reyes sighed and shook his head. Then he handed Agnar's ring to her. We can't afford to let any of the villagers see us like this. But the thieves will get away, Gaggara protested. Put the ring on, Reyes insisted. We mustn't get caught. Gaggara looked at the ring regretfully and then slipped it on her finger. A moment later, Reyes placed his hand on her shoulder and she was dressed again. It would be easier to catch them by flying, Gaggara insisted. But far too dangerous, Reyes replied. He willed himself human again, and a moment later he too was dressed. Come on, and remember not to speak unless you absolutely have to. Reyes and Gaggara made their way out of their room to the hayloft. They had taken so long in getting ready that the two would-be thieves had already descended to the bottom, and had they wanted, they'd had plenty of time to flee across the fields in any direction. Instead, the pair of them had fled to the main door of the inn, and they were banging on it profusely. Let us in! There are harpies out here! Try not to make any noise, Reyes said as he began to descend the steps. Handsome, Gaggara replied in an indignant whisper. I'm a huntress. She followed close behind him. Help us! One of the thieves shouted. They are coming! They are coming! Then, as Reyes reached about the halfway mark on the steps, he could hear the voice of the innkeeper coming from somewhere inside the inn. He sounded angry as he said, What's going on out here? What's all this noise in aid of? There are harpies at the inn, one of the thieves cried. Now, the innkeeper replied, Don't you start that again. I've had enough of that from you two jibing me last night. Now leave it alone. We're serious, one of the two thieves shouted. Look, said the other. What's it cost you to come and take a look? Reyes reached the bottom of the steps and turned the corner. He saw that the innkeeper had come out to chat to the two thieves. The innkeeper was carrying a heavy meat cleaver that he must have fetched from the kitchen before coming to the door. By his side was standing Sam Pear, carrying a lantern to light the conversation. Reyes yawned loudly for the benefit of all those present and then inquired, What's going on? He's a harpy, one of the thieves cried. This man is really a harpy. I'm a what? Reyes responded incredulously. He glanced quickly up at Gaggara, a smirk on his face. Apparently we're harpies, he said to her. Oh, Gaggara replied. She smirked. An expression bordering on that of despair came over the face of the innkeeper. He shook his head slowly. Ulrich, Ulrich, Ulrich. What were you and Wren doing in this gentleman's and this lady's room in the first place? The man called Ulrich hesitated. We got lost, Wren offered quickly. Very lost, the innkeeper stated. The two of you live on the other side of the village. I'll tell you what you were doing in the gentleman and this lady's room, shall I? You saw the gold in this gentleman's purse last night, and you thought you'd help yourselves to it. You'll be up before the magistrate for this one." "Where's your evidence?" Wren pressed. "I'd sooner be up before the magistrate than be a harpies' dinner," Ulrich said. "I don't want any hassle," Reyes insisted. "My wife and I need to reach the capital. We can't afford to be delayed by a trial." "You don't want to press charges?" the innkeeper asked. "We don't," Reyes agreed. "Yeah," Ulrich commented, "because then certain things might come out about you." Reyes took Gaggara's hand in his and headed back to the stairs. "We're going back to bed. We'll be down at first light. If you could have breakfast ready for us, that would be great." "Will do, sir," the innkeeper said. Then he spoke to the two thieves. "Today's your lucky day. It seems my guests don't want to press charges against you, because we've had enough of that kind of talk. Clearly you've had too much to drink this evening. Go home." "I don't want to see you in my barroom for the next week," the innkeeper said. "You got that? You two are banned for a week." Reyes and Gaggara returned to their room. Gaggara sat on the edge of the bed, her body vibrating with the effort of not laughing. "Stay human for the rest of the night, sweetheart," Reyes said as he settled beside her, and placed an arm around her, just in case. Gaggara looked at him deep in the eyes and said unhappily, "I guess you're right."